When you think of Isaac Newton, what comes to mind? Probably the genius under the apple tree, right? The father of modern science who basically figured out gravity. But that's only one side of a very, very complex story.
What if that ultimate rationalist was also driven by passions we'd now consider, well, irrational? And what if the architect of science was also one of its last great magicians? To figure that out, we really have to look past the legend.
All right, so first up, let's talk about the legend, the one we all know from the textbooks. Isaac Newton is this colossal figure, the man who laid the entire groundwork for classical physics and completely redefined how we see the universe.
And look, the scale of what he did, it's just staggering. His book, the Principia, it didn't just add to science. For centuries, it was the foundation of science. He didn't just study motion, he invented the mathematical language, calculus, to even describe it. This is the giant we all think we know.
But, to really get the genius, you have to get the man. And Newton's early life? It was anything but stable. It was a life forged in turmoil, and it created a deeply complex and, honestly, an often tormented personality. He was born into a world without a father. Then, at just 3 years old, his mother left him to go live with her new husband. And that abandonment, it left a scar so deep that years later he actually wrote down a list of his sins, and on it was, threatening my father and Mother Smith to burn them and the house over them.
And all that deep-seated insecurity? It absolutely spilled over into his professional life. It made him obsessively secretive and just ferociously defensive. He became this solitary workaholic, prone to these bitter, lifelong feuds with pretty much anyone who dared to criticize him.
And you want to see a perfect example of this? Look no further than the infamous fight over who invented calculus. Now, Newton actually developed his version years before his rival, a guy named Gottfried Leibniz, but he kept it secret, terrified of being criticized. So when Leibniz published his own, totally independent discovery, Newton didn't just claim priority, he waged war. The result was this nasty dispute that went on for decades, with Newton using all his power at the Royal Society to officially brand Leibniz a fraud.
So, despite this, let's say, difficult personality, or, maybe because of his obsessive focus, Newton's scientific work was nothing short of revolutionary. He set out to find a single, unified system of rules that governed the entire cosmos.
And these 3 laws, they became the absolute bedrock of physics. Before Newton, the universe just seemed chaotic, mysterious. But with these principles, he showed that the cosmos was, surprisingly, predictable. For the first time ever, the movement of a planet and the flight of a cannonball could be described by the exact same set of rules. For 200 years, this was our universe.
But his real masterstroke, the thing that tied it all together, was the law of universal gravitation. This was the big idea. The very same force that makes an apple fall to the ground is the same force that keeps the moon circling the Earth and the Earth circling the sun. With one beautiful equation, he united heaven and earth under a single physical law.
And his genius wasn't just, all in his head. He was hands-on. In one incredibly elegant experiment, he totally changed how we think about light. He didn't just show that a prism could break white light into a rainbow, he proved that white light is the rainbow by using a second prism to put all those colors back together again into white light. It was just a definitive, beautiful demonstration that revolutionized the field of optics. Okay, so that's Newton the scientist, the ultimate rationalist, right? But now we get to the other half of the story, the half that Newton kept hidden his entire life, his deep, obsessive dive into the world of the occult. And listen to this. This quote, it doesn't come from some rival trying to tear him down. It comes from an admirer. When the famous economist John Maynard Keynes bought Newton's private papers back in 1936, he thought he was getting the notes of a scientist. What he found instead was a secret that led him to this shocking conclusion. The public image of Newton was basically a myth.
And the sheer scale of this secret work, it's just mind-blowing. Newton wrote over 1 million words on alchemy. Now, to put that in perspective, that is way more than he ever wrote about science or math. This was not some casual hobby. This was a lifelong obsession. So his whole alchemical quest, it wasn't really about turning lead into gold. I mean, not just about that. He was hunting for the philosopher's stone, but he saw it as a key to understanding the very building blocks of matter.
He believed the Earth was a kind of living thing, and that through these experiments he could decode God's secret recipes for creating the entire physical world.
And if you think that's it for the secrets, oh no, he was also a religious heretic. At a time of really strict religious rules, Newton secretly rejected the doctrine of the Trinity, a core belief of Christianity. He thought it was a corruption of the Bible, and that worshiping Christ as God was idolatry. If this stuff had ever gotten out, it would have totally destroyed his career and his reputation. No question.
So, how do we square this, the scientist and the magician? Well, here's the thing. For Newton himself, there was no paradox. He didn't see two different paths. To him, it was all one single, unified quest to understand the mind of God.
And this right here, this is the key to his entire worldview. For Newton, science, alchemy, and theology were just different tools for the exact same job: to read the books that God had written. So whether he was using math to figure out the laws of nature or trying to find the original, pure laws in the Bible, he believed he was just tracing the divine order of the universe, wherever it led him.
You know the neat little boxes we have today? Science here, spirituality over there, maybe a little magic in the corner. For him, those lines just didn't exist. Take gravity, for instance. To him, it wasn't just some abstract force, it was a constant, active expression of God's power in the world. And that integrated worldview is what fueled his genius.
And near the end of his life, despite everything he'd accomplished, Newton stayed incredibly humble. He saw all of his life's work, gravity, calculus, optics, as basically nothing more than finding a few cool pebbles on the beach. He wrote, "I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me."
So, in the end, the story of Isaac Newton really leaves us with this big, provocative question. Here's the man who built the foundation of our scientific age, and yet he was driven by this deep, mystical faith. His life completely challenges our neat categories and forces us to ask, where do we draw the line between science and belief? And, in the search for knowledge, should we even be drawing one at all?